Okay, as you can tell, I'm outside again. I love to be outdoors. I'm, off my patio on a stone pad that we have back here, or a concrete pad that we have, and actually the my computer here, my camera is sitting on our fire pit, so that's kind of cool stuff. But anyway, some stuff to talk to you about today. Some of your essays, a lot of your essays were very, very good. You're getting into the idea of delving into stuff, talking about it deeply, really saying things in depth. Okay, some people are still doing a little too much storytelling, but most of you are using the stories as examples of the points you're trying to make, and that's really what we would like you to do. And it's interesting that some of you are still willing to bring in, and we want you to do this if you can, personal experiences, things from your own life, or that have been part of your existence, to help make the points in the stories. So that makes it better for everybody. And your comments are getting better, and your comments are really good. Not that they've ever not been good, but this week's comments were the best by far. So many of you were willing to say, I didn't see it that way. I don't think I quite agree with you, and here's what I thought. And then some people might come back and say, you showed me something new about this. That's really cool. So, we want you to grow in your enjoyment and understanding of literature and what it's all about. And, we want it to be fun. So this interplay, I think, is fun, where you get a chance to comment to each other. And you're doing just a great job with it. So I'm really, really pleased with that. We want to move on, of course, to a new concept today, okay? We're going to talk about the concept of narration. And here's the important thing with narration. In a piece of fiction, it is not the author who tells us the story. The author doesn't tell us the story. The narrator tells us the story. The author creates a narrator to tell us the story. Okay? So the narrator is a character that the author creates, and that narrator tells us the story. The author writes a story, the author creates the narrator, but it is the narrator who tells us the story. What's the difference? Well, Edgar Allan Poe created great narrators, okay? I mean, his narrators were amazing. His narrators drew you into the story, made you feel part of the story, and I'm sure all of us have read some Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe frequently has his narrators talking from the point of view of I, okay? And we'll talk about the fact that that's a first-person narrator in a little bit. Because his narrators talk to us from the point of view of I, sometimes people think it's actually Poe talking to us in the story, but it's not. He created those narrators, and here's how you know that. His narrators are often druggies or crazy people or drunks. He created stories that people wanted to read. Fascinating stuff, okay? Poe was a master at creating these narrators. Poe was actually a very boring guy, lived a boring life. Yes, he had an allergy to alcohol. He almost couldn't drink. But because he created narrators who were sometimes drunk, the critics said that Poe was a drunk. Not true. Not true. Poe drank very little. When he did drink, it pretty much incapacitated him for significant periods of time. Okay? So, but his narrators, these created narrators, the storytellers in his stories, made us think that Poe was the guy that used drugs, Poe was the guy that went crazy, Poe was the guy that used alcohol. Not true. Those were all created narrators. And in every piece of fiction that we read, we have a created narrator. If you look at the story Rose for Emily, okay, William Faulkner wasn't there. He wasn't telling us that story. He created a narrator to tell us the story. Okay, and if you go back to the story of An Hour, okay, and we have the story of the supposed death of the husband, and then the wife ultimately dies. Well, again, we have a narrator telling us that story. Okay, so I want you to understand that what we get in fiction telling us the story is a narrator. There are different types of narrators. Sometimes the narrator is a third-person narrator. Okay, a third-person narrator looks at the stories from the outside, and he's not part of it at all. He's just telling us what's going on. It's almost like he's looking at it from above, narrating for us. I was at the Bills game today. Some of you may have watched it on television, and you had narrators telling you what was happening down there on the field. They weren't down there on the field. They weren't part of the action. They were only telling you about it. That's a third-person narrator. Okay, a third-person narrator is not I or we. He's talking about they, he, she, it. So the first week we read Appointment in Samara, and we had a third-person narrator telling us that story. Okay, and the other two stories that we had, the story of an hour and the one about the woman who was really lonely and depressed and ended up dying at the end. Those are all told to us with somebody looking at it from the outside. A Rose for Emily is a little bit different. In A Rose for Emily, we have somebody that's kind of on the inside telling us the story. That's a first-person narrator. If you look through A Rose for Emily, you'll see a lot of things come from the point of view of we, okay? We have a person who is, the narrator is a spokesperson for the town people. And sometimes we get a narrator who's actually part of the story. A first-person narrator who actually talks about I and we, and they're actually part of the action. So a third-person narrator is he, she, it, they, and is removed from the story. A first-person narrator is somebody who is part of it all, and again speaks to us from the first person. I, we, they, okay? Us, not they, but us, I, we, us, and so that's first-person narration. It's like I am telling you the story, and I am in some way part of the story. There's different kinds of first-person narrators. I spell those out in the notes, but again, a first-person narrator generally is speaking from the point of view of we or I, okay? Now, different kinds of first-person narrators. We just have the first-person narrator who tells us the story straight from me. Then we have a first-person narrator that's termed an omniscient first-person narrator. He knows everything. Omniscient, the word itself, omni means all, and scio means know, from Latin. So omniscient means all-knowing, like God is omniscient. Well, an omniscient narrator knows all the details, knows everything that happens, and is part of the story. Okay? That's a first-person omniscient narrator. Then we can have a semi-omniscient first-person narrator. Somebody is part of the story, and they think they know all the details, but they don't quite know all of them exactly right, and so we get a little bit of personal interpretation in them. Okay? So again, third-person narrator, somebody viewing it from above. First-person narrator is on the inside. In what you're reading for this week, you'll see one story where there's a first-person narrator and another story where there's a third-person narrator. Don't be fooled in the third-person narration story by the conversation that comes from the point of view of I. A lot of times the narrator will write a story and put in conversation where people are speaking to each other and somebody will say I. That's not a first-person narrator. That's only a character in the story, not the narrator, but a character in the story who's talking about I. So view all this stuff carefully, okay? Now, your question for this week that I need you to email the answer to is this, okay? In a cask of Amontillado, who is the first-person narrator? Whoop, I just gave you a big hint as to which story is which. But in that story, who is the first-person narrator? Email me your answer on that, and we'll go forward from there. Questions, let me know, okay?